Will, I'm incredibly excited to speak with you and have this chat because when this report came out last week, it was quite shocking even for me in the industry, for health professionals who I shared it with and the like. We knew it was going to come out. We knew the realities of what electric vehicles can have on the American market, on the American community, but it still shook me. So we have a global audience here with a lot of individual audience from the United States as well. Let's bring everyone kind of up to speed on where we're at with this report. With that, please share with us first who the American Lung Association is, what your role is, and then walk us through some of the high-level results of the report and what the individual health impacts are for widespread adoption of zero-emission transport.
Thanks so much, Farhan. Wonderful to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to share our work. The American Lung Association is the oldest voluntary health organization in the United States. Our mission is to save lives by improving lung health and preventing lung disease. One of the key ways that we do that is through our advocacy work. And part of that is the work that I do based on working on clean air and climate change issues. So last week, the American Lung Association released our Road to Clean Air report, which is really looking at the potential for public health and climate change benefits related to a widespread transition to electric vehicles across the United States. We looked at basically what would happen if all of the new cars, buses, and trucks in the United States were electric over the next 25 years. And really, as you said, the results were striking. We found we could generate $72 billion in annual public health benefits, over 6,000 deaths avoided per year, 90,000 asthma attacks, and over 400,000 lost workdays avoided due to cleaner air based on 1 year's worth of pollution, in this case in 2050. So what this means is better health across the United States. It means fewer communities being overly burdened by pollution. So too many low-income communities and communities of color face disproportionate burdens due to transportation pollution in the form of highways, ports, rail yards, warehouse operations, those kind of things that draw a lot of diesel truck traffic. So we really wanted to look at what could these potential benefits be, and what do we need to do to make sure that the potential benefits that we highlight in our report aren't just potential benefits on paper, that we can actually make progress and make these public health benefits a reality.
No, I mean, that's very well spoken. I mean, we have to constantly keep acting and at a more accelerated rate. And before these kind of questions come in from the audience, I have one more point from myself. Sometimes when we're in this industry, we kind of speak in a vacuum. We're speaking to our peers, we're speaking to our colleagues who are up to date on the results, up to date on what the data suggests from a mobility perspective. But the American Lung Association is a rather prestigious organization, and we're in a quite unique time period right now with COVID, where health is kind of on everyone's mind. How do you see your role as an organization with this health focus in this overall conversation about technology, clean tech, and moving to a sustainable future in mobility?
Sure, and you hit the nail on the head. We're involved in a lot of exercises right now. There's, in addition to our report on electric vehicles, we're ramping up our COVID action initiative. We're marking the 50th anniversary of the Federal Clean Air Act with a virtual Clean Air for All symposium next week. And part of that is a panel on innovation in the clean air world. And we know that in order to achieve clean air for all communities, we need technological innovation. We need the policy drivers, the investments, all pointing in the right direction to take health into account when decisions are being made. So really, our role here is to really highlight the potential benefits to our health and to our climate by taking these actions. One note on the report in terms of climate change, in 2050, the pollution reductions we calculated came out to over $113 billion in climate benefits globally through this transition to electric vehicles, just based on the pollution reductions made in the United States in the year 2050. So again, we're dealing with the COVID-19 health pandemic, with extreme wildfires. I live in California. We've been dealing with extreme heat, smoky air for over a month now. And, we also have colleagues throughout the country dealing with hurricanes, extreme storms, all kind of compounding the urgency of addressing climate change and really trying to put the word out there that climate change is first and foremost a public health threat.
No, I definitely agree, and that coming from an organization such as yourself, from its health perspective, it matters so much more. So I see this question from Joyce. So the CDC withdrew the air aerosol guidance on Monday when there is ample scientific evidence. What would you suggest to make American public more aware? WHO, the World Health Organization, is similarly slow in addressing clean air.
Well, we certainly recommend following the most up-to-date scientifically based guidelines for protecting public health from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our website, lung.org, has our latest resources on public health protections during COVID. We also have resources for folks being affected by wildfires and other climate-related disasters, as well as highlighting our report online at lung. So yeah, I mean, there's changing dynamics. There's a lot of opportunity, unfortunately, for confusion, and we're hoping to just make clear to people the best ways to protect their own health, the health of their families, the health of our frontline health workers. Really want to make sure that people have the most up-to-date information, and we're trying to make that available on our website as well.
Great. Yeah, I mean, some good advice from an expert himself. Another question from James. Hi, Will. I'd be interested in your thoughts about the interplay between COVID and air pollution. They both attack the lungs. Are you seeing any evidence that air pollution exacerbates COVID? What does this mean for green recovery, clean air, and climate action?
Thank you, James. It's a great question and one that we've been looking into. Certainly, we know that there are many similarities between the effects of COVID-19, especially the disparities in the impacts on COVID-19, as well as disparities in transportation pollution burdens. We have seen some of the early research that areas with higher levels of pollution can contribute to worse outcomes if people do contract COVID-19. So, we know that lung health is critically important ultimately, and we need to do everything we can to protect lung health, not only as the pandemic has been unfolding, but also the day-to-day realities of air pollution and climate health impacts. One quick thing to note is that within the green recovery, we know that we can't let the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a respiratory health threat, kind of counteract our will to make sure that we're moving forward on clean air issues through the economic recovery. And we're calling for a focus on electric transportation within the path forward out of COVID-19, because we know setting a baseline of good lung health is critical.
No, I mean, I think this next question actually kind of interplays with that one very well. This is from Martin. Do you see cities and government openly agreeing that less air pollution drives greater health and therefore financial benefit, or is there still some debated topics? And I'd like to tie in that from my own personal perspective as well. Do you see this question from the context of automobiles and the shift to electric vehicles? Is there still a debate in your research, in your discussions?
Well, I would just say that there's often not enough attention paid to the public health cost of transportation pollution. And what we're trying to do with this new report is really highlight at the federal, state, and local levels that there are public health benefits to be had if we make these investments and policy changes now to accelerate the deployment of electric transportation. And one of the things that I think is most important, just to your other point, is we're not just talking about passenger vehicles. We're talking about delivery trucks, transit buses, school buses, heavy-duty trucks, all needing to make this transition in order to reduce the public health burdens. In our report, we found 18 states with over $1 billion worth of public health benefit to be gained in a single year. We also found for 14 cities across the United States, over $1 billion in public health benefit. So we're trying to make the case at the local, state, and federal level that the transition to electric transportation is critically important and will yield significant public health benefits. And part of those public health benefits are avoiding lost work days for employees who now no longer have respiratory issues keeping them from going to work. So there's a productivity issue as well that is important to include.
No, well said. And this next question comes from Marian. What can the NGO sector do to encourage more electric vehicles, support Electric Vehicle Alliance, for instance, and other such topics like EV100 as well? But yeah, just your points on that.
Sure, I think the philanthropic sector can continue to support advocacy organizations, research, and other ways that we can really make the case that this transition is not only feasible but it's necessary. And I think that baseline of looking at best practices, sharing information across advocacy organizations, governments, academics, really getting the support out there that is needed to continue a strong push. We know certainly that for the last 50 years under the Clean Air Act, we've made tremendous progress in cleaning up our air, fighting climate change. We also know that the Clean Air Act is under a significant amount of pressure right now due to rollbacks and interpretations of science, or lack of interest in interpreting the science correctly and setting stronger standards at the federal level. So that's another area where the Lung Association is trying to really make the case that we need to follow the science, we need to protect public health, and we need to make sure that we're following the 50 years of precedent set by the Clean Air Act that has saved so many lives across the United States and really set a high bar for public health.
Yeah, definitely. The Clean Air Act is definitely something, and California is seeing the impacts of that from their landscape, from their perspective, very seriously from the federal government. So this question is from Caitlin. In parallel to the strategy like ramping up EVs, what else is the American Lung Association doing to address the environment's impact on health? For example, increasing mobility options that are accessible to all, such as building or expanding public transit.
Sure. I was going to bring up before we close, actually, that we know that when we look at the transportation sector, the shift to electric vehicles is critical. But we also know at a certain point we need to, and that certain point is right now, I would argue, we need to be really looking at ways that we can reduce the demand for driving, the demand for, or basically find ways that we can reduce vehicle miles traveled because of the transportation pollution that's generated. So we've advocated for shifting transportation investments to projects that don't expand driving necessarily. We've looked at ways that we can support active transportation. I'm wearing a bicycle tie today, actually. It's critical. I commute by bike, and I think it's something that we should be looking for so that all communities, regardless of income, have access to strong infrastructure to support biking, walking, and adequate transit so that we have actual alternatives to reducing the amount of driving we need to do. Certainly in the U.S., we have a growth in the amount of traffic and driving we do based on sprawl and urban planning that pushes people further and further from job centers. So it's a critical area and one that we're engaged in heavily, certainly in the California context.
That's well said. Yeah, I think from a global kind of perspective, it's interesting to see the United States is built in the last 100 years. It was designed to be spread out more. That's lobbying or what have you that caused that, but there was an impact. So now that we need to figure out how do we accelerate public transport more to get this lower emission future that we want. This question's from Mark. What is the ALA's position on microtransit? How does it fit?
Certainly we're looking at all sorts of options for increasing mobility, increasing zero emission mobility, and looking at ways that we can support people's need to get around and do so in the healthiest possible way. So there's so many options out there that continue to pop up, and we look at all of them and are really looking at ways that we can reduce the burden of transportation pollution on everybody. And I think we're definitely open to looking at all solutions.
Gotcha. I hope Mark finds that answer informative. So, so some more questions come in. I have my personal questions as well on a specific data set. So the report lays out some harsh realities for this equity kind of conversation. In the report, you kind of state there's 14 million plus people of color living in counties that have failing grades for ozone days, particle days, and annual particle levels, versus a little under 7 million for white individuals. Can you share with us a little bit about how you came to this reality, where the data kind of came from, and what you see as the future should we not address mobility right now for these people of color?
Sure. That information comes out of our annual report called the State of the Air. We put that report out every April. And this year was our 21st annual report, and it's based on air quality monitoring data across the country. What we found was that basically people of color were over 3 times more likely to live in a county that we assigned a failing grade to for the 3 categories of pollution you just mentioned. And, that really speaks to the need for, more targeted conversations about equity and the pollution burdens that people of color face. We know that there's been a longstanding overburden in many communities, and we're trying to really highlight that in this report. We know, as I said at the beginning, we see similar discrepancies and disparities in negative health outcomes in the COVID pandemic as well. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we're hoping that our report is shining a bit of light on that in terms of the transportation pollution sector as we go forward, because it is so critical and so striking when you see those levels of disparity and just how unfair that is.
Yeah, this equity piece is a growing point for us at the Climate Group as well, because our work really focuses on businesses and them committing to electrify their fleets and make electric transport the new normal by 2030. But we all have a part to do in this equity component because transport and emissions do impact so greatly, as you state in your report, to people of color and low economic status. So as we wrap up, I have one kind of question. So you lay out these harsh reality, should we not transition to zero emission mobility? But you also then end it with an optimistic note. You lay out federal, state, local, and individual efforts that people in those various demographics can take to address solving this future. From an EV100 perspective, our businesses are stepping up. They're committing to switch their fleet to electric. But from a policy professional standpoint, as myself, I see this, the federal and state and local parts also very interesting. But you also lay out this what individuals can do to help this move forward. Sometimes people kind of feel like they're in a vacuum themselves. They don't know what they can do. They realize climate change is real. How can they change? Can you just walk us through some of those points you address in the report that can give some optimism, some hope for these people that are looking to change their ways?
Sure, and I think it's not entirely contingent on people changing their ways. I think it's more so that we want people to be aware of all the great options that are out there for electric transportation. We encourage people to test drive a vehicle if you've never done so. I think that's the first step in really making sure that people are aware. There's also, the fact that there's a lot of incentive programs out there for consumer purchases or tax rebates that people may not be aware of, and we want to make them more aware. We also want to give people the opportunity to really advocate for changes in their community, whether that's making their city EV ready through advocacy there, pushing our state leaders, pushing our federal leaders to follow the Clean Air Act. We have a petition on our website related to our report calling for governors across the country to really prioritize electric vehicle and the infrastructures that's needed to give people maybe a little bit more comfort as they're making their next purchase decision. And that's if they need to buy a new car. As we talked about before, there's a lot of ways to get around that you may not need to own a car, and those options are growing. So as we move forward, we want to support individuals who are trying to make the clean air decision with some of the resources that we have.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Will, for giving us time to speak with us today. You can find the report on their website should you want some more deeper information. Now, please join us back at the auditorium for our next session, Climate Change, Deforestation, and Global Pandemics. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.